My son Marcus stood at the altar in his $1,000 tuxedo, looking down at me in the second row with pure disgust. The wedding ceremony had just concluded. 200 guests were applauding as he kissed his bride. But his eyes were locked on mine with an expression I'd seen too many times over the past 5 years. The look of someone who considered my very existence an embarrassment to his carefully curated life. The reception was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes at Riverside Manor, the most exclusive event venue in the city. Marcus had spent 18 months planning this wedding, sparing no expense to ensure it reflected what he called his elevated social position. He'd booked the premium package: 7-course dinner, premium bar, live jazz ensemble, imported flowers. The total cost was $127,000. What Marcus didn't know, what he'd never bothered to ask or investigate, was that I didn't just work at Riverside Manor as the head of facilities maintenance. The job he was so ashamed of, I owned it. I'd owned it for 6 years, ever since the previous owner defaulted on a loan I'd given him during the 2008 financial crisis. And in exactly 30 minutes, my son was about to find out that the worthless janitor he'd spent the last hour humiliating in front of his wedding guests held the key to whether his $127,000 reception would happen at all. Welcome to Family Reckoning. I'm sharing this story today because respect isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn. And sometimes, the people who think they're above you are actually standing on foundations you built. Let's connect. Drop your city or country in the comments below, so I know where you're watching from. Also, please note this video contains fictionalized elements for storytelling and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual people or places is purely coincidental, but the core message about family respect is very real. The sound of industrial-grade floor polishers at 5 a.m. is something that gets into your bones when you've been doing maintenance work for 30 years. It's a steady, rhythmic hum that drowns out everything else. The doubts, the disappointments, the voices telling you that pushing a mop doesn't make you worth much in this world. I started working maintenance at office buildings in downtown Chicago when Marcus was 8 years old. His mother, Linda, had left us 2 years earlier, deciding that life as a single woman in California was preferable to raising a child with a man whose earning potential she'd reassessed as insufficient. She sent birthday cards for the first 3 years, then nothing. So it was just Marcus and me in a 2-bedroom apartment on the south side, making it work on my $28,000 a year salary plus whatever overtime I could pick up on weekends. I worked the overnight shift cleaning office buildings because it paid $1 more per hour, and that extra $8 a night meant Marcus could have name-brand cereal instead of the generic stuff. "Dad, why do you have to work at night?" Marcus would ask when he was 10, watching me get ready for my shift while he did homework at the kitchen table. "Because that's when the buildings need to be cleaned, son," I'd tell him, adjusting my work uniform. "And someone has to do it right. People notice when their workspace is clean, even if they don't notice the person who made it that way." I was proud of my work. I took pride in making sure every office building I maintained was spotless, safe, and well-functioning. I fixed broken fixtures, replaced burned-out bulbs, ensured the heating and cooling systems ran efficiently. I wasn't just a janitor. I was a facilities specialist who understood every mechanical and electrical system in a modern commercial building. But pride in manual labor isn't something that translates easily to a 10-year-old who's starting to notice that other kids' fathers wear suits to work. By high school, Marcus had developed a complicated relationship with my job. He was grateful for what it provided. I'd worked enough overtime and saved enough money to get us out of the apartment and into a small house in a decent neighborhood with good schools. But he was also ashamed of it, especially when his friends would ask what his dad did for a living. "He works in building management," Marcus would say, which was technically accurate but carefully vague. I didn't correct him. I understood that a 16-year-old needed to feel like he belonged with his peers, and having a father who mopped floors didn't help with that belonging. I figured he'd grow out of it once he matured and understood that honest work had its own dignity. I was wrong about that. Marcus graduated third in his high school class and earned a full academic scholarship to Northwestern University. I was incredibly proud, the first person in our family to go to college, studying business administration with plans to work in corporate finance. But college changed him in ways I didn't expect. He came home for Thanksgiving his freshman year using words I had to look up and talking about internships at investment banks that paid more in 3 months than I made in a year. "Dad, you should really think about developing some marketable skills," he told me during that visit, sitting in our small living room with his laptop open to job postings. "The service industry isn't going anywhere. but you could probably get into building management or property development if you took some courses. He was trying to be helpful, but what he was really saying was that my current job wasn't acceptable, that I needed to become something more respectable to be worthy of his association. I appreciate the thought, Marcus, I said, but I like what I do. I'm good at it, and it's putting you through college. I have a scholarship, Dad. You don't need to sacrifice your potential for me anymore. My potential, as though 30 years of skilled facilities work had been some kind of holding pattern until I could become something better. The change accelerated after he graduated and landed a job at a prestigious consulting firm in Chicago. Marcus started wearing suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He moved into a high-rise apartment downtown and began socializing with people who, in his words, understood the importance of professional networking and personal branding. Our relationship became a series of carefully orchestrated meetings in restaurants Marcus would choose, never too fancy, because he didn't want to seem elitist, but never anywhere too casual, because he didn't want to be seen somewhere beneath his status. He'd sit across from me and provide updates about his career advancement, his new social circle, his dating life with women who worked in law firms and marketing agencies. But he never asked about my work anymore. He'd changed the subject whenever I'd mentioned something interesting that had happened at one of the buildings I maintained. A challenging HVAC repair, a tenant improvement project I'd managed, new energy-efficient systems I was learning to install. That's great, Dad, he'd say with the polite disinterest of someone humoring a person whose life was too small to warrant genuine attention. The real shift happened when he met Cassandra. Cassandra Williams came from what she called old Chicago money, which meant her great-grandfather had made a fortune in meat packing and her family had spent 4 generations converting that fortune into social status and political connections. She was beautiful, educated, and possessed the particular kind of confidence that comes from never having had to question whether you belong in any room you enter. Marcus was completely captivated by her world. Within 6 months of dating her, he'd begun adapting his speech patterns, his clothing style, even his posture to match what he perceived as her social class expectations. Cassandra's father owns 3 commercial real estate companies. He told me during one of our increasingly infrequent dinners. He's been mentoring me about investment strategies and market positioning. He says I have real potential in commercial development. The service sector, that was how he'd begun referring to my work, not as skilled labor, not as facilities management, but as part of a broad category of jobs that served other people and therefore held inherent lower status. By their 2nd year of dating, Marcus had effectively erased my existence from his social life. When Cassandra's family hosted dinners or social events, Marcus would attend alone, explaining my absence as a scheduling conflict or work commitment, rather than admitting that he was ashamed to introduce me. I found this out by accident when I ran into one of Marcus's Northwestern classmates at a restaurant. "Hey, you're Marcus's dad," the young man said enthusiastically. "I was just talking to Cassandra last week. She mentioned she's never met you. Marcus must be keeping you busy with work." Huh, never met me. After 2 years of dating, Marcus had never introduced me to the woman he was planning to marry. That night I called him. "Marcus, I think we need to talk about Cassandra meeting your family." A long pause. Then, "Dad, it's complicated. Cassandra's family moves in very specific social circles. They're used to interacting with people who share their background and experience level." "I see. And what background and experience level is that?" "Professional, executive, people who own businesses or work in senior management positions." "Dad, I'm not saying you're not successful in your own way, but their dinner conversations tend to focus on topics that might not be relevant to your experience. Topics that might not be relevant to my experience." Translation: I wasn't educated enough, sophisticated enough, or wealthy enough to sit at their table without embarrassing him. "Marcus," I said quietly, "I raised you to be better than this." "Better than what?" "I'm not ashamed of you, Dad. I'm just being practical about social dynamics. When I marry Cassandra, I'll be joining a family with certain expectations and traditions. I need to be strategic about how I navigate those relationships." Strategic. He was strategically managing my access to his life to ensure I didn't damage his social positioning. We didn't speak for 3 months after that conversation. During those 3 months, something interesting happened. The owner of Riverside Manor, a man named Robert Sterling, approached me about a business proposal. Robert had owned the venue for 12 years, but the 2008 financial crisis had devastated his investment portfolio. He'd been struggling to make mortgage payments on the property and was facing foreclosure. He knew I'd been doing facilities work there for 5 years and had seen the improvements I'd made to their mechanical systems, the way I'd reduced their energy costs and improved their operational efficiency. "Tom," he said during a conversation in his office in early 2009, "I need to sell this place, but the market is completely dead. No one's buying event venues right now. But I've got an idea that might work for both of us." He proposed a lease-to-own arrangement. I would take over the mortgage payments and operational costs in exchange for managing the venue and gradually building equity toward full ownership. It was a 7-year plan that would transfer the property to me if I could keep it profitable. "Robert, I'm a maintenance guy," I said. "I don't know anything about running an event business." "You know more than you think," he replied. "You understand every system in this building. You know how to manage contractors and vendors. You've been watching our operations for 5 years. And most importantly, you understand that success comes from attention to detail and taking pride in your work." It was a risk, a massive risk. I'd be responsible for a $2.3 million mortgage on a property in a struggling economy with no guarantee that the events business would recover. But I'd spent 30 years watching other people own the buildings I maintained. I'd seen how much money flowed through these properties, how much profit was generated by the work I was already doing. I took the deal. For the first 2 years, I kept working my regular maintenance job during the day and managed Riverside Manor in the evenings and weekends. I learned every aspect of the business: catering coordination, vendor management, event planning, financial operations. I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week, gradually building the venue's reputation and profitability. By 2012, Riverside Manor was turning enough profit for me to quit my day job and focus exclusively on the venue. By 2015, I'd paid off the mortgage and owned the property free and clear. By 2018, we were booked solid 18 months in advance and had a waiting list for premium dates. I never told Marcus about any of this. Part of it was pride. I wanted to see if he'd ever develop enough interest in my life to notice that something had changed. Part of it was protection. If he knew I was successful, I wanted to be sure he was reconnecting with me as his father, not as a potential source of financial benefit. But mostly it was disappointment. My son had made it clear that my worth to him was measured entirely by social status and earning potential. I wanted to see who he really was when he thought those measurements disqualified me from his respect. The answer to that question came at his wedding. Marcus and Cassandra got engaged in the spring of 2019. The engagement announcement in the Chicago Tribune Society pages described her as the daughter of prominent real estate developer Harrison Williams, and him as a rising executive in strategic consulting. No mention of his family background or where he'd come from. I learned about the engagement from the newspaper, not from Marcus. He called me a week later, his tone carefully neutral. "Dad, I wanted to let you know that Cassandra and I are getting married next fall. We're planning a fairly large celebration. Congratulations, son. I'm happy for you." "Thank you. We're still working out the details, but I wanted to give you plenty of advance notice." There was something in his tone that suggested this wasn't entirely good news for me. "Marcus, am I invited to your wedding?" A pause. "Of course you're invited. You're my father. But Dad, I need you to understand that this is going to be a very formal event. Cassandra's family is hosting, and their guest list includes some very prominent people. Business leaders, political figures, social influencers. The kind of people who pay attention to details." "What kind of details?" "Attire, conversation topics, social protocols. I'm not saying you can't handle it. I'm just saying it might be helpful if you prepared appropriately." He was asking me to perform, to dress up like someone I wasn't and pretend to belong in a world he'd decided was superior to the one that had raised him. "I'll wear a suit, Marcus. I'll be respectful to your guests. But I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not." "I'm not asking you to pretend, Dad. I'm asking you to be mindful of the setting and the company. This is the most important day of Cassandra's life, and I want everything to be perfect for her. Perfect for her. Not perfect for us as a family celebrating his marriage. Perfect for her, which meant I needed to be managed as a potential source of imperfection." The wedding planning process took 16 months. During that time, Marcus would occasionally call me with updates, always framed as practical information rather than attempts to include me in the celebration. "We've booked Riverside Manor for the reception. he told me during one of these calls. Cassandra fell in love with the gardens and the ballroom. It's supposed to be one of the most exclusive venues in the city. I almost laughed. Really? How did you hear about it? Cassandra's wedding planner recommended it. She said it's where all the prominent families hold their major celebrations. The owner is supposed to be very selective about bookings. They only accept clients who meet certain standards. Certain standards. If only he knew. Sounds expensive, I said. It's an investment in our future, Marcus replied. The connections we'll make at this wedding could be invaluable for my career development. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money. An investment in his future, with no consideration of where the money was coming from or what it represented in terms of other people's sacrifices. 3 weeks before the wedding, Marcus called with what he described as one final logistics discussion. Dad, about the seating arrangement at the reception. Cassandra's planner has put together a very strategic layout based on business relationships and social connections. You'll be at table 12, near the back, with some of the extended family and family friends. Table 12, near the back, with the people who weren't important enough for strategic placement. Marcus, I'm your only parent. Shouldn't I be at the head table, or at least close to it? Dad, the head table is just the wedding party. And the front tables are for Cassandra's parents and their business associates. It's nothing personal. It's just strategic. Strategic. Everything about my relationship with my son had become strategic, calculated based on its impact on his social positioning rather than its value as a human connection. I understand, I said. But what I understood was that Marcus had made his choice. He'd decided that his father's love, sacrifice, and 30 years of working multiple jobs to give him opportunities was worth less than a good seating chart at his wedding reception. That's when I made my decision about how his wedding reception would actually go. Before I tell you about the moment that changed everything, the moment Marcus discovered that his worthless father controlled whether his $127,000 reception would happen at all, let me know you're still invested. Comment, still here, or drop 100 points below so I know you're following along. What comes next is where 18 months of careful planning met 5 minutes of absolute truth. And just a heads up, the following events incorporate some dramatic storytelling elements for educational purposes. If that's not your style, feel free to click away now. But if you want to see how entitlement meets reality in the most expensive possible way, let's keep going. The wedding ceremony was held at St. James Cathedral downtown, a Gothic revival church that Cassandra's family had been attending for 4 generations. 200 guests filled the pews, business executives, political figures, society families whose names appeared regularly in the Tribune's social pages. I sat in the second row on the groom's side, wearing my best navy suit and a tie I'd bought specifically for the occasion. I'd arrived early and watched the guests filter in, noting how they clustered into distinct social groups, the way they sized each other up with quick glances at clothing, jewelry, and apparent wealth. Marcus stood at the altar in a custom tuxedo, flanked by 6 groomsmen who all looked like they'd graduated from the same business school. He was nervous, but not about marriage. He kept scanning the pews, making sure all the important people had shown up, that the social optics were exactly what he'd planned. When the processional music began and Cassandra appeared at the back of the cathedral, Marcus's face lit up. She was genuinely beautiful in an elaborate designer gown that had probably cost more than I'd spent on my first car. But what I saw in Marcus's expression wasn't just love. It was triumph. He was marrying into the social circle he'd been trying to join since college, and this ceremony was his public confirmation that he'd achieved that goal. The service was traditional, elegant, and completely impersonal. The pastor spoke about the sacred bond of marriage, but everything felt choreographed for appearance rather than meaning. This wasn't a celebration of love. It was a social transaction, beautifully executed. After the ceremony, there was a receiving line on the cathedral steps. Guests approached Marcus and Cassandra with congratulations, business cards, and invitations to future social events. I watched from a distance as Marcus worked the line like a networking event, spending extra time with the guests he most wanted to impress. When my turn came, I approached with genuine happiness for my son, despite everything that had led to this moment. "Congratulations, Marcus," I said, reaching out to embrace him. Marcus accepted the embrace, but I could feel his tension, his awareness of who was watching, his calculation of how this interaction would appear to Cassandra's family and their important guests. "Thanks, Dad," he said, his voice carefully neutral. You look handsome, son. Your mother would be proud. The mention of his mother, the woman who'd abandoned us both, was a mistake. Marcus's expression darkened immediately. I'd reminded him, in front of his new social circle, of his background, of the fact that he came from a broken home, that he'd been raised by a single father whose work embarrassed him. Dad, he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, I need you to understand something. This is Cassandra's day. This is our day. I need you to be appropriate. I'm being appropriate, Marcus. I'm your father congratulating you on your wedding. You're being. He glanced around, making sure Cassandra's parents weren't close enough to overhear. You're being overly familiar. These people don't know you. They don't understand our background. I need you to keep things simple and professional. Professional. He was asking me to treat his wedding reception like a business event where I was some kind of service provider rather than his father. That's when something broke inside me. Not just disappointment, but a deep, structural crack in my willingness to tolerate his disrespect. Marcus, I said, loud enough that several nearby guests turned to look. I understand exactly what you need. Don't worry about me embarrassing you. I know exactly what kind of event this is. Marcus's face went pale. He could hear something in my voice that he didn't recognize. Not hurt, not submission, but something that sounded like controlled anger. Dad, please, can we just get through today without any drama? There won't be any drama, son. I promise you that. The reception is going to be exactly what you planned. I walked away from the receiving line, got in my car, and drove to Riverside Manor. I had 30 minutes before the guests would begin arriving for cocktails, and I had some final preparations to make. The venue looked spectacular. My staff had spent days preparing the gardens, the ballroom, and the dining areas. Every detail was perfect. Imported flowers, crystal chandeliers, luxury table settings, premium bar setup. It was exactly the kind of elegant celebration that Marcus and Cassandra had envisioned. But what they didn't know was that the contracts for this event required payment in full before service could begin. And the final payment, $63,000 for catering, bar service, and staffing, was scheduled to be processed that afternoon. The payment was coming from a credit line that Cassandra's father had established, backed by Marcus as a co-signer. It was a significant amount of money, but not unreasonable for a family celebrating their daughter's wedding at the most exclusive venue in the city. What was unreasonable was that the venue owner, me, had the absolute discretion to cancel the event if payment couldn't be processed or if the behavior of the hosts violated the terms of service. I'd written those terms of service myself, based on 6 years of dealing with entitled clients who thought their money gave them the right to treat my staff disrespectfully. Marcus had just violated those terms. At 4:30 p.m., the first guests began arriving for cocktails in the garden. The scene was everything Marcus had planned. Beautiful people in expensive clothes, mingling among carefully landscaped gardens, served premium cocktails by professional staff. The photographer moved through the crowd, capturing moments that would appear in society magazines and on social media, documenting Marcus's successful entry into Chicago's social elite. I watched from my office window as Marcus and Cassandra worked the crowd, introducing each other to family members and business connections, building the network they hoped would define their future together. At 5:45 p.m., my event coordinator, Janet, knocked on my office door. Mr. Patterson, she said, the credit line payment just declined. The bank says there's insufficient credit available on the account. I wasn't surprised. I'd called the bank that morning and explained that I had concerns about the event host's ability to pay, given some disturbing interactions I'd had with him. I'd requested that they place a hold on the credit line until they could verify the charges directly with the primary account holder. Have you contacted Mr. Brennan? I asked. I called Marcus 3 times. He's not answering his phone. He's taking photos with the wedding party. Of course he was. Marcus was too busy performing for his new social circle to handle the practical details of paying for his reception. Janet, I said, please follow our standard protocol for payment failures. Inform the hosts that service will be suspended until payment can be arranged. Janet looked concerned. Sir, there are 200 guests here. Dinner is supposed to start in 15 minutes. I understand, but our contract is clear. Payment in full before service begins. No exceptions. I walked downstairs and found Marcus in the garden, posing for photos with Cassandra and her family. He looked confident, happy, completely convinced that everything was going according to his perfect plan. "Marcus," I said, approaching the group, "I need to speak with you privately." Marcus turned, irritation flashing across his face at being interrupted during his photo session. "Dad, whatever it is, can it wait? We're in the middle of something important." "Actually, no, can't wait. There's an issue with your reception that needs immediate attention." Cassandra's father, Harrison Williams, looked at me with the polite confusion of someone trying to figure out why the help was interrupting a family moment. "I'm sorry," Harrison said to Marcus. "Who is this gentleman?" Marcus's face went white. He was trapped between acknowledging me as his father and revealing his background to the social circle he was trying to join, or pretending I was someone else, which would create an even more awkward situation. This is my father, Tom Patterson," Marcus said finally, his voice tight with embarrassment. Harrison extended his hand with the careful courtesy of someone maintaining social protocols despite obvious discomfort with the situation. "Mr. Patterson, nice to meet you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to discuss a payment issue with Marcus immediately." "A payment issue?" Cassandra asked, looking confused. "The credit line you established for the reception has been declined," I explained to Harrison. "We need alternative payment arrangements before dinner service can begin." Marcus stepped forward quickly. "Dad, this really isn't your concern. We have everything handled." "Actually, Marcus," I said quietly, "it is my concern, because I'm the owner of Riverside Manor, and our contract requires payment in full before service begins." The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus stared at me, his mouth slightly open, his brain trying to process what I'd just said. Cassandra looked between Marcus and me, clearly confused about family dynamics she didn't understand. Harrison's expression shifted from polite confusion to sharp business interest. He was a successful real estate developer, and he recognized that the power dynamic of this conversation had just changed completely. "You own this venue?" Harrison asked. "Yes, sir. I've owned it for 6 years, and I'm afraid we have a problem." Marcus found his voice. "Dad, what are you doing? You work in maintenance. You can't own this place." "I've been working in maintenance for 30 years, son. That's how I learned to run commercial properties. That's how I built the capital to buy this place when the previous owner defaulted during the recession." The wedding guests were beginning to notice that something was happening. Conversations were quieting as people turned to watch the developing drama. "Marcus," I continued, "you've spent the last 5 years telling me that my work was worthless, that I was an embarrassment to your social position, that I didn't belong around successful people like your new family." Marcus's face was now bright red. "Dad, please, not here. Not now. Actually, son, here and now is perfect, because your beautiful reception is about to be canceled unless someone can pay the $63,000 balance immediately. And the only person present who has that kind of liquid cash available is the worthless janitor you've been hiding from your wife's family." The impact of this statement rippled through the nearby guests like a shock wave. This wasn't just a family argument anymore. This was a public humiliation of the groom at his own wedding, in front of everyone he'd been trying to impress. Cassandra grabbed Marcus's arm. "Marcus, what is he talking about? Pay the balance. Just pay it." "I can't," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The credit line was supposed to cover it. I don't have $63,000. Harrison stepped forward, his business instincts taking over. "Mr. Patterson, I'm sure we can resolve this misunderstanding. What exactly do you need to proceed with the reception?" I looked at Harrison, then at Marcus, then at the crowd of guests who were now openly staring at our family drama unfolding in real time. "Mr. Williams, what I need is very simple. I need someone to pay the outstanding balance for tonight's services. And I need an acknowledgement from your new son-in-law that the man he spent 5 years calling worthless built the business that's hosting his wedding." Marcus was shaking now, caught between his desperate desire to save face with his new family and his complete financial dependence on his father's goodwill. "Dad, please," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I never meant. I didn't know." "You didn't know because you never bothered to ask, Marcus. You decided what I was worth based on what I wore to work, not what I'd accomplished or sacrificed. You decided that serving other people made me less valuable than the people being served." I looked around at the wedding guests, all of them dressed in expensive clothes, standing in gardens that I'd personally designed and maintained, waiting for dinner to be served in a ballroom I'd renovated with my own hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, raising my voice so everyone could hear, "I apologize for the disruption to this celebration. There's been a misunderstanding about payment that needs to be resolved before dinner can be served. I'm confident we'll have it sorted out momentarily." The public announcement transformed the situation from a private family argument into a business crisis that would be remembered and discussed by everyone present. Harrison stepped forward again, clearly trying to salvage the situation. "Mr. Patterson, I'll cover the balance personally. How would you like payment arranged?" I looked at Marcus, who was staring at the ground, his perfect wedding reception disintegrating around him. "Marcus," I continued, "you've spent 5 years trying to ruin our relationship because you were ashamed of where you came from. You thought your father's work was beneath you, that his love wasn't worth your respect, that his sacrifices were something to be hidden rather than honored." I paused, looking around at the assembled guests, the magnificent venue, the elaborate celebration that Marcus had planned to announce his arrival in high society. "Now you get to choose. You can acknowledge that the man who raised you, who worked 3 jobs to pay for your college, who built the business that's hosting your wedding, deserves your respect. Or you can explain to 200 guests why your reception was canceled, because you couldn't treat your father with basic human dignity." The choice was stark, public, and irreversible. Whatever Marcus decided in the next 30 seconds would define not just our relationship, but his reputation with the social circle he'd spent years trying to join. Marcus looked at me, then at Cassandra, then at her father, then at the crowd of guests watching this family drama unfold in real time. Finally, he spoke. "Dad," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the garden, "I owe you an apology. Public apology. I've spent years being ashamed of work I should have been proud of. You built something remarkable, and instead of celebrating it, I hid from it." He took a deep breath, his entire body shaking with emotion and embarrassment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he continued, addressing the wedding guests directly, "I want you to know that the beautiful venue hosting our celebration tonight is owned and operated by my father, Tom Patterson. He built this business through 30 years of hard work, dedication, and the kind of integrity I hope I can someday earn." The guests applauded, though whether from genuine appreciation or relief that the crisis was being resolved, I couldn't tell. "Dad," Marcus said, turning back to me, "I'm sorry for all of it, for being ashamed, for hiding you, for treating your work like it was somehow less valuable than mine. You deserve better from your son." I studied his face for a long moment. The apology felt genuine, but it had been delivered under extreme duress, with his entire social future hanging in the balance. "Marcus," I said finally, "apology accepted. Janet will arrange payment with Mr. Williams. Enjoy your reception." I turned and walked back toward the main building, leaving Marcus to explain the situation to his new family and salvage what he could of his carefully planned social debut. The reception proceeded as scheduled. Dinner was served, speeches were given. Dancing continued until midnight. From my office window, I watched Marcus and Cassandra celebrate with their guests, the crisis apparently resolved. But something fundamental had changed. Marcus had been forced to publicly acknowledge his background, his father's success, and his own poor judgment in front of the exact people he'd been trying to impress. The aftermath took several months to fully develop. Marcus and Cassandra's marriage proceeded, but the wedding reception story became part of Chicago society lore. The groom whose worthless father turned out to own the venue and nearly canceled the wedding over disrespectful treatment. Marcus called me 2 weeks after the wedding, asking to meet for lunch. We sat in a quiet restaurant downtown, both of us careful and formal, like diplomats negotiating after a war. "Dad," he said, "I've been thinking about what happened at the wedding, about everything that led up to it. I'm listening. I was wrong, not just about apologizing publicly, but about everything, about being ashamed of your work, about hiding our relationship, about treating you like you were somehow less valuable than the people I was trying to impress." He paused, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "I realized something that night. All those people I was trying to join, Cassandra's family, their business associates, the social circle I thought was so important, they were impressed by what you built. They understood that owning a successful business requires intelligence, skill, and years of dedicated work. And I was the only person in that room who didn't understand it. I was the only one who thought manual labor was something to be ashamed of. Everyone else recognized that building something from nothing is exactly what successful people do. It was a good realization, though it had come at considerable cost to both of us. Marcus, I said, I need you to understand something. I didn't buy Riverside Manor to embarrass you at your wedding. I bought it because I saw an opportunity to build something significant. The fact that you booked it for your reception was just ironic timing. I know, which makes it worse. You've been running a multimillion-dollar business for 6 years, and I never bothered to ask about your life enough to find out. I just assumed you were still pushing a mop somewhere. We talked for 2 more hours that day. Not about business or social status or networking opportunities, but about the relationship we'd lost and whether it could be rebuilt. It's been 3 years since the wedding. Marcus and I have lunch every month now, sometimes more often. He's learned about the venue business, offered genuinely helpful advice about expansion opportunities, and brought clients who need event space. But more importantly, he's learned to ask about my life, my work, my experiences as though they have value in themselves rather than just instrumental value for his career. Cassandra and I have developed a good relationship. She was initially embarrassed by the wedding incident, but she's come to appreciate what she calls my no-nonsense approach to family respect. She's also become one of Riverside Manor's best referral sources among her social circle. Last month, they told me they're expecting their first child. Dad, Marcus said, I want this baby to know their grandfather. The real grandfather, not some cleaned-up version I think will be more socially acceptable. I want them to understand that dignity comes from how you treat people and how hard you work, not from what you wear to the office. I'd like that too, son. We're rebuilding. Slowly, carefully, with the understanding that respect is something that has to be earned and maintained by both sides. But I learned something important from this experience that I want to share with anyone who's ever been made to feel ashamed of honest work. Your value isn't determined by other people's assessment of your job title. Success isn't measured only in salary figures or social status. And the people who think they're too good to associate with you because of what you do for a living are revealing their own character defects, not yours. Manual labor built this country. Service work keeps it running. The people who maintain the buildings, prepare the food, and keep the infrastructure functioning deserve respect, not condescension. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person you're looking down on is actually the person whose foundation you're standing on. If this story reached something in you, if you've ever been made to feel small because of honest work, I want you to know that your labor has dignity. Your contributions matter, and the people who can't see that aren't worth impressing. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If it helped you understand something about family respect or the value of all honest work, please share it. Subscribe to Family Reckoning so you never miss another story about standing up for your worth. And remember, sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the people who thought they were too good to learn from you.